Welcome to Fly Action in Focus.
In Focus. It's easier to write down than say it.
This is part 2. If you've not checked out part 1, I'm sure it'll be linked to somewhere on the page that you're viewing from right now.
It's worth having a look just because there's a nice fish capture dissected to show how animating your flies, bringing them to life, can transform your fishing.
Yeah, we'll also be flagging up later on that there's an email tutorial mini course available that coincides with these little sort of mini series.
With a special bonus.
Yeah, so we'll be talking more about that later. To pick up where we left off, we'd talked about some manipulations already, some sort of induced movement in the fly.
Yeah, and the idea that that's not a new thing in fly fishing. It's far from like a novel concept.
I mean, your earliest going on video record is 2003. Paul produced a stunning DVD called An Introduction to River Fly Fishing.
Yeah, which bizarrely, I mean, let's face it, it was me with a handheld home camcorder and limited editing skills. So the production values were not great,
you got some great feedback from people who were learning from it.
It was the content that people, it was the information and the content.
Yeah.
But just to flag up, I guess, we can have a look at a piece from that, which just goes to show that, we weren't strangers to this idea of making those flies actually move around and dance for the fish.
Now let's look at inducing takes during the drift. We've been catching lots of fish from this pool, and there's certainly more still around. However, they'll be used to seeing our flies drifting past by now. So after letting the flies reach depth, a small lift can sometimes tempt a fish to pounce on a nymph as it appears to escape. And it's that little black nymph again.
So you can see from the archive footage that
the high quality archive.
We're no strangers to the idea of moving nymphs, and we saw in episode 1 historically, people like Frank Sawyer famous for the induced take, this slight lifting and movement of flies to get that movement, a natural looking movement.
Yeah, so clearly it's a thing within fly fishing, but also from the early DVD material. It's something that's in our DNA as well. We're very familiar with it. And as part of that story, we both came across the 2007 publication, Fly Fishing and Fly Tying Volume 2, by some prominent, actually it's like a murderer's row of Czech competition anglers. Fantastic resource. And within that, there's mention, almost cryptically actually, but it's something that's clearly very, very well familiarised and absorbed within their fishing techniques as well.
I can see you've written on our prompt too. It's titled Active Management of Nymphs.
That's it, yeah. I mean, and I don't know how much of that is a sort of a translation, a direct translation from the Czech language. But yes, they're active management.
I mean, that if it is just a translation, even a mistranslation, it certainly sows a seed. Active management.
It's a nice one. I like it. It captures a lot about it, I think. Yeah. Now, before we get to some on-stream footage, it's really important to kind of acknowledge and recognise that the groundwork for those captures and the techniques within it was laid well before that. And it's a way of illustrating our own journey, our own realisations of piece by piece, kind of putting this picture together. And if I could actually ask the honourable gentleman, these are some handwritten notes from the early 90s. These are getting on for 25 years old now. Actually took a friend of mine fishing from lock-style fishing from a drifting boat in a large drinking water reservoir, Buell Reservoir in Kent, if anybody's interested, where this took place. But he had very kindly introduced me into rock climbing, and that became a real passion of mine. And so it was a bit of a kind of an exchange visit thing. I said, well, we're going to go fishing and, we're going to have a great time. But before that, you're going to need to know how to do it. So I produced this small booklet of little diagrams and notes to actually explain.
It is like a school project.
What are you saying?
Like things cut out and stuck on it. It's fantastic. The 90s.
As I was saying, could the honourable gentleman please read this phrase? Because I think it's important for the topic at hand.
You can tell it's a doctor's writing.
Listen, you can at least read that. You want to see my handwriting? No.
This is called retrieving, in inverted commas, and different hand movements impart different motions to the flies. Different retrieves can produce success with the same fly patterns and lines which previously failed.
That was a key phrase. So the idea is that you can have the same rig, and this is in stillwater fly fishing, exactly the same rig, exactly the same flies, casting it over the same fish, but depending on how you animate those artificial flies or patterns or tractor patterns, again, coming back to that theme, you can turn a blank day into a successful one. You can turn a non-taking fish into one that leaps on your fly like a tramp on chips.
I love that saying. Basically, it's a go-to. There's a classic, isn't there? A guy will be on stream and a fish won't take his fly if you can see it, or he's not catching. So you just cycle through all the familiar flies in the sort of order of preference.
Your tip is getting shorter and shorter.
Yeah. And this what we're talking about, this sort of change we're trying to make in people's fishing, what we're trying to give you with this mini-series, is instead of reaching for the next fly, you reach for the next movement. So you've got something you can cycle through. And it is a game changer. I've said it before.
You can change that a lot more quickly than you can change flies, which is another thing. But before we get too full of ourselves and ahead of ourselves, we knew about this a long time ago. That doesn't necessarily mean that I am, always quick enough on the uptake, and there are plenty of occasions where I've been really slow to remember this lesson myself. So I think it's really useful for everybody. It's certainly been useful to me to actually be reminded of the fact that you need to look at this as a tactic just as much as you would with changing the flies.
I know what's coming here. It's in addition to the fact that it's on my little prompter. The sort of students are passing the master. This happens more often than you give credit for, because as a teacher, you're giving out these lessons all the time, and it's old news in your mind. You know to sort of pass it on, but sometimes you're not as sort of ready to be using it. It's not the first thing in your mind to try. And when you've got a student, they're basically, they've just learnt this thing, so they're red hot to try it, and they can sort of overtake you when it works on the day.
Absolutely,
they're often in front of the teacher.
A little analogy that I would throw in, it's a bit like oftentimes some climbers will fall off easier ground because they've sort of forget about the basics, because they kind of almost they underestimate it and they just forget to go back to the fundamentals. It's a really important lesson. So the story, I mean, you know the story, but I'll certainly tell it. There's Danny, a guy that actually, along with several other really, really good anglers, so Stuart Crofts involved, Dave Woodhead, a number of other people, took Danny out and taught him to fly fish. He'd previously been a bait fisher. And he just loved it, took to it like a duck to water. Obviously did a lot of work on his own, so it's not like anybody's taking credit for Danny going out and putting all the hours in that he did. But it was, true to say that he'd only been fly fishing a couple of years versus a couple of decades. And we used to run these charity matches which were designed to actually be records of the fish, the wild fish populations.
Like a survey sampling kind of exercise.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is part of the Sprite, the Trout in the Town group that was formed in Sheffield, probably over 10 years ago now. And we used to have these regular competitions just to actually keep a record and a track of the wild fish that were coming back to this recovering post-industrial river. And I do remember one particular occasion quite well that quite late on in the session I actually realised that the fish wanted a manipulated presentation, and they were primarily grayling that we were catching on that particular day. And I felt very pleased with myself because, dead drift wasn't working for most of the day. Caught a few fish on manipulated presentations. course, Danny rocks in, and he'd probably caught twice as many fish as I had. He'd had about 50 odd or something like that. But he was saying, the people were laughing because Danny was trying to say, but it wasn't easy because he had to make them, lure them into taking the fly, and people were sort of laughing, saying, "Oh, what do you mean it wasn't easy? You caught 50 odd." But the thing is that, and I knew very well from my own experience, unless those flies were animated, those grayling weren't really in a mood for taking those flies. So it's a real good lesson, and it was in the nicest way possible to be kind of brought down a peg or two with a bump, and actually realise, you got to get on those basics and have it as part of your armoury, ready to use right away.
It can be that big a difference, can't it? Someone catching half a dozen fish and someone catching 50 fish.
Yeah, I mean, I know. I probably had sort of 20 something or something on that day, but they're a shoal fish, so those kind of numbers are quite possible within a short period of time.
At the time, 10 years ago, it was a very prolific river for grayling as well. You could get some absolutely tremendous captures.
So the take-home lesson from that story and many more like it is really that it's not just what the fly looks like when you finish tying it in the vise that's the important thing. The prey image, the image that predators use to actually recognise food, it's the way that things move as well as that silhouette. So it's not just a kind of a rigid, fixed, cut-out shape that you're looking for there. So the take-home message from that story, and many more like it, is that it's not just the shape of the fly, what it looks like in the vise when you finish tying it, that's the important thing. The way that these artificials move is just as important. It's just as an effective component of what's called prey image. The way that predators recognise food. So that's not just a silhouette, it's based on how the things move as well. Those are parameters that these fish will use to actually identify something that's worth to eat. And I guess that it sort of segues quite neatly into the fact that because we've both had a bit of a biological background, and also with the occasional handy reminder from people sort of humiliating us in competitions and whatever else, but that really made ourselves, we were quite receptive subjects and receptive vessels when we started to see some of these more detailed fly animation tactics when we were exposed to them in Japan specifically.
Yeah. I mean, when we first travelled to Japan, we'd already been studying tenkara. Obviously, we'd had a couple of 3 years at tenkara. We'd even been visited by Dr. Ishigaki, on our home streams. But when we went to Japan, we got an even more sort of clear view of the rich tapestry that's manipulations in tenkara.
I think if we obviously let's have a look at some of those things as we talk about them. That the level of subtlety and the range of tactics, and then we started to realise that these people that are having such great success on these really difficult rivers in Japan, there was a structure to it as well, and that kind of kicked our brains into gear to really analyse what is this system and how they're using it, and why is it so much richer than what we've previously come across.
There's more to come. We're only sort of reaching the middle point of this series, and as we mentioned in episode 1 there, and at the start of this episode, in fact, we have a mini tutorial email course where there are a few little bonuses in there as well. This is completely separate from our regular email tutorials. It's only a short course, and it's designed to sort of mesh perfectly with what you're watching now. Give you
a stepping stone, a leg up into sort of starting to use some of these manipulation tactics and see the benefits of them for yourself. As part of that, we're going to have a free chapter from our brand new DVD that explains these techniques and demonstrates their effectiveness in great detail. So completely no obligation, you can sign up, you'll get that chapter for free, and you can see whether that's working for you as well. So go ahead and do that for sure.
Links are around on screen in the description. I'm sure wherever you're watching this video, just take a quick look around the page somewhere and you'll find a link. In addition to that, as we sign off, we always like to say thank you to our supporters on Patreon. That is, without a doubt, the only way that we've been able to keep bringing this kind of content to you. If you're interested in supporting these episodes, if you'd like to give us a hand, for the price of a cup of coffee a month, you can be just making a little contribution to keep this on the air.
We hugely appreciate those contributions. It's not an exaggeration to say that we would have gone out of business by now if that wasn't the case. So that being said, do check out the next episode that's going to follow hot on the heels of this one, where we'll continue showing you how to multiply the power of every single fly in your box.
That's it. Until next time, see you then.